Okay, good morning, everybody. Am I audible on the other side?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, good morning once more again. My name is Constance Ndumela. I am the librarian here at Sol Plaatje University. I am responsible for the School of Economics and Management. I will be taking you through the first part of the program today. Before we go even further, I would like to for us to get a word of welcome and introduction from Ms. Molopiane. Ms. Molopiane is a director of libraries at the University of the Free State. Over to you, Ms. Molopiane. Okay, maybe that was too quick. This day today, we are gathered here to commemorate the International Open Access Week. As academic institution, it is our duty as well to be part of the conversation, to be part of the discussions of this important theme around open access publishing. We focus mainly today around open science. So let me hope that Ms. Jeanette is here already. Jeanette, did you manage to join the meeting?
Thank you very much, ma'am. I have joined. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I guess I have to start. Connie. Good morning, colleagues.
Good morning, Jeanette.
Yes. Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to this very important event where we celebrate open science as part of our Open Access Week. When we talk about open science, we talk about social justice. This is so important for us, especially the African continent, the richest yet the poorest continent. Open science is really a tool for us to elevate what we have, to take our own knowledge to the world, the African knowledge, our expertise as Africans, our resources, our indigenous knowledge as part of open science, so that the globe should see what Africa really has. So open science is also one of the tools towards poverty alleviation, because now knowledge is available for the world to see. It is so important for Pule, a first-year engineering student who doesn't have resources and support to pursue his first-year engineering course. So open science will facilitate his knowledge, especially with the level of intelligence that he has, to ensure that at the end of the day, whatever that Pule will come up with, the invention as a result of open science, something that is going to sort out the universe problem. So for me, open science is so significant, so important, so invaluable. I'm going to acknowledge all the speakers who are here. I'm going to acknowledge Dr. Nokuthula Mchunu, the Deputy Director of the African Open Science Platform, or WASP. I'm going to acknowledge Ms. Monica Boland and Mr. George Muloy, the Research Office from Sol Plaatje University. I'm going to recognize Prof. Bankole Awuzi from Central University of Technology. I'm going to acknowledge Mr. Hercules Combrink, Co-Director, Interdisciplinary Center for Digital Futures, University of the Free State. I'm going to acknowledge Professor Katinka Divet, Co-Director, Interdisciplinary Center for Digital Futures, University of the Free State. I am also going to acknowledge Dr. Molapo Kobela, Vice Rector, Institutional Change, Strategic Partnerships and Social Impact, University of the Free State. And lastly, I will acknowledge Mr. Charlie Molepo, Deputy Director, Library and Information Services, University of the Free State. Colleagues, let me take this opportunity to welcome each and every one of you as we hold hands and ensure as a collective that we fully embrace and implement and execute open science for the best of our institutions collectively, and where we spread it nationally, continentally, and globally. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Molopiane, for the words of welcome. Without wasting any time further, I want to start now by introducing our keynote speaker. As Ms. Molopiane has also mentioned, we have in our midst Dr. Nokuthula Mchunu. She's here to present on African Open Science Platform. Dr. Nokuthula prefers just to be called Nox. Okay, Dr. Nokuthula is the Deputy Director at the African Open Science Platform, hosted by the National Research Foundation in South Africa. Dr. Mchunu has a wealth of experience in academia outreach programs, the popularization of science, and STEM with local communities. She was a senior researcher from the Agricultural Research Council in South Africa in the biotechnological platform. She completed her doctoral degree at DUT. She also served as the scientist in a number of international institutions, including USA, Sweden, China, and Malaysia. She is the first recipient of the Young Scientist Program between China and South Africa. Over to you, Dr. Mchunu.
Thanks, Constant. Hi, everyone. Can I just, before I start speaking, can you give me rights to share, Constant? Because I can't share anything. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's hope the team will sort you out, Doctor, quickly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you again to everybody. I would like to acknowledge everybody here. I think the most important things are the people involved in information dissemination at this moment as librarians. I think they will play a big role moving forward. But I'll also thank everyone for the invitation, Constant, your director, and the 3 universities that come together, and I really glad that people are starting to celebrate and talk and have this conversation in open science, especially universities. I think they'll play a big role. So let me try to share. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes,
you can do.
Yes. Yeah. Before I start, also I'd like to apologize. I'm currently in Benin, so connection may not be best, so just let me know quickly if I'm talking to myself or there's some things that are happening that I wouldn't know about. So the African Open Science, as Constant has just alluded to, is a platform hosted by the NRF, but it comes from a long vision. So for many people who have put it through before it is here now. There's a lot of stuff that happened, so I will just quickly go through that, why we have this platform and what it looks to do or get involved in. So sometime in November last year, the UNESCO recommendation was agreed on in Paris by the 190 so member states, to say that everybody agrees that open science now has to be a priority, and they will do it. So I show all member states, and it's the same thing I'm doing here in Benin, especially in West Africa, to say that it's not an option at this moment. We have agreed to as member states in the UN to participate in this new way of doing science. But besides that, it is a good way of doing science, as by the previous welcome speaker showed that it is actually science for social justice, per se. So these recommendations came about with a lot of work for the past 10 years or so. There's some forward progress that had happened in open science that I will try to recapture. So before we start, I know there's a lot of confusion between open science and open access. So I will use the UNESCO definition of open science, which there is a lot of definitions and some of them are correct, but I'm using this as our base. So basically, open science aims to make science, when again use science, we're talking hardcore science, your life sciences, engineering, but you including any type of science, sciences, humanities, you name it, any type of work that happens globally as research, it is science. So I know a lot of people, again, when we use the word science, they may generally lean towards hardcore sciences. So the aim of this is basically to make science open, inclusive, and equitable. So if you look at the definition, it aims to make all practices of science multilingual. A very ambitious thing. It needs to be open to knowledge, accessible, reusable for everyone. And by doing this, you'll be able to increase collaboration and sharing of information beyond what we think is the traditional way of doing science and the scientific community. So if we take the main aim in the statement of open science, the aim is to make science, information, research, whatever you name it under that umbrella, accessible, inclusive, and equitable. These are the three things, because if we can do this, then science will benefit society. We will not do science for the sake of doing science, but we will do science for society. So there are many global trends that have started in open science. There is global Open Science Cloud, is the EOS project in the US in Europe, that looks at open science and how mostly targeted infrastructure. But what we think, what are the main imperatives for Africa, with South Africa is included as a whole. So it's basically to make sure that the continent, the African continent, can have global or develop their own commons into solving continental and global challenges. And also we need to promote the best practices of open science that are already happening in the continent, and looking at their impact in the society. And at that point, we're looking at data. How do we share data? How the data is shared? And what does it mean when we take fair data and all these things? So Africa needs to define a little bit in their own context what does that mean. And then open access and publishing. So I'll talk a bit more for the sake of today on this, but these are main pillars that open science look at. You look at collaboration, you look at solving global challenges, look at how data is used, and then you look at communication and publishing in science. So the AOSP as itself with this background, so as I said, there's been a lot of work. We are currently around this year, 2022. So the conceptualization of this, which happened between different organizations, including the International Science Council, and then it looked at implementing the pilot phase of the African Open Science Platform. You had ASAF being involved in SA trying to operationalize this pilot phase, and CodeData, which is a subcommittee of the International Science Council, making a lot of technical input into the project. So by the year 2018, the operational of the African Science Platform started. But however, as we all know, throughout the years of 2020 and 2021, we had a little bit of a COVID situation, so there wasn't a lot of things happening there. But right now we are in the implementation phase and deliverables, and see how we can take this project forward. So I will talk to some of these implementation and deliverables in the context of open science. So the African Open Science Platform, its vision and aim is basically to take the African scientists to the cutting edge of modern data, intensive science, and make sure that fundamental resources are used for modernization of society or for advancement of society. So it will do this by addressing the African challenges and global challenges as a whole. So what we think is important is, one, we need to have a federated structure of facilities. It could be e-facilities, it could be physical facilities, and policies that will make this network of infrastructure works. And then two, we need to develop skills that are associated with handling of this data science, and we're envisioning mostly a virtual continental institute that will work in providing this capacity. And I think in this area of data science and AI and large data, repositioning of libraries and librarians will play a big role into data and data stewardship and all processes that are involved in this. And also, we want to promote collaboration within the African continent. So if we look at the work that is done in looking at collaborations between institutes, between internally in the continent and with the global north, it's a fascinating story that most scientists or most institutions within the continent collaborate less with each other and more with the global north and a bit with the global south. And we aim to try and change the situation and have a lot of continental collaboration within institutes. And then, of course, create a network of education and skills in data and information, and have this type of open science and access dialogue. So how does the African Open Science look at how doing this? So we have to have the main things happening there: your governance, the management of the platform, engaging with the stakeholders, operationalizing the platform, and having all the activities and looking at the impact by monitoring and evaluation the work we do. So we think that we have captured what I was talking about in success point. What is our aim? Who are our stakeholders, as I've said, and then what we aim to offer, as I've alluded. So we really think that we need to consolidate and multiply the effort of different activities in Africa on open science and collaboration. And I think that AOSP will provide doing this multiplication effect and networking and making sure we work cohesively in connecting the dots in all the different stakeholders or role players that are doing this work in Africa. So I think it is important to partner with different people, but I think AOSP is positioned well in partnering and fostering or connecting people. We don't really say you should connect with us, but I think we are building up a lot of stakeholder partnerships that we can connect other partners to what we with other stakeholders that we work with into this type of work. So I will just pick up a little bit of work that has been done on open science as a whole in different areas in our regions in Africa. There's WACRAN, which is the West African region of NRENs, educational NRENs, where they have started a project called LiveSense, which is based for library support for embedded NREN services and e-infrastructure. So it's quite an interesting project. So what they look at in Western Central Africa is looking at all the sister regional research networks and how they can help countries work on repository establishment, software, tools for this type of work, data sharing with the countries, and what is the required infrastructure that is associated with type of work. So it's quite a lot of work that is happening within this region, and I think it's something that each and every region can duplicate quite relatively easy, but with some resources that are required. As I've captured a bit, they're looking at the infrastructure that are NREN based, or NRENs as they are made up of universities and institutes. So they're looking at hardcore infrastructure. They're looking also at working on policy and governance and leadership within these activities in open science and capacity building. So they're looking at a lot of training that are associated with these activities. And we are currently also collaborating with them and working on a standing MOU into doing these activities with WACRAN and bringing other partners into these activities. So what we've been doing in the short terms for the African open science, we are looking at rescoping where we are with the open science landscape in Africa. And we also want to make sure that we are making the AOSP visible and what it has to offer and the contribution to open science. And we are making a lot of effort into meeting the stakeholders. These are some of the stakeholders we've been currently meeting this year and making sure that we are moving forward with activities and programs that will be involved in open science. So what is then the operational framework for the platform? We are making sure that we are setting deliverables or indicator what will be the impact of the platform, which should be published soon. We've also published 5 nodes calls. So the African Open Science looks to have physical nodes in the 5 regions of Africa that will carry out certain work of open science, but in their region. There's a call also for the governing council of the open science that will close soon, and the announcement will be made by December. We're also working and prioritizing resource mobilization to make sure that the African open science is sustainable. We've also been working with different partners in different regions in Africa to start policy development. These are the countries that we've been working with, especially in West Africa, Ivory Coast. We've had a lot of workshops on drafts or thinking about draft of the open science policy. South Africa, we've been involved quite a bit, although it's quite an advanced stage. Also with the East Economic Bloc, all those countries listed there, we are looking at starting frameworks for their policy development. And then in North Africa, we are also starting workshop on policy development as of next week, which will be a workshop based in Egypt. We are also involved in the Open Access Project. There's a lot of work going on with the International Science Council task team on opening the record project, which looks at dialogue with publishers and how we can really make science communication really open. And we've been working with our old partner, a very supportive partner, ISC, under Code Data, into looking at open data, training, capacity development, and data schools for working open data and open science. So these are some of the upcoming events for open science that we are planning. So one of them, we are planning to have an open day, a whole side event with UNESCO at the World Science Forum, which is happening in South Africa on the 7th. We're also working with the Ubuntu Net Alliance, which is an alliance of Southern and Eastern African NRENs. We're running a library repository workshop with tools and training for one day before the conference. So these are type of activities that we want to involve ourselves in, especially when it comes to open access. There are some projects that are associated with open data and health. We have a $5 million funded project with UCT that will look at open data associated with Africa, which the African Open Science is a partner in it. So for the sake of today, I put specific slides that talks to open access and publishing. So open access, as we know it now, where is pay to publish, is a model that really doesn't talk to open access. It's something that we really need to think about, and what does it mean for the researcher, and what does it mean for the continent. I had an experience just recently. Last week, I spoke to a professor from Burkina Faso that has a paper that has been accepted in with the publisher and the impact factor. Again, there's another thing up for discussion of 8, but they're asking him $10,000 to publish the paper. So this is interesting that he has to at least pay close to $180,000 to publish a paper. Is this open access? Is this really what it means to make scientific information available for the larger community, or just the basic research community? So for the open science to work, open access or open communication, we really need to think about the new models of publishing. Again, the new models have to take into account quality and equality in this. We need to think about general democratization of science. So if you look currently, it's been well known that the current models of publishing or publishers, although we think it has scrutiny, it has, peer reviewed, but it's always biased towards a certain group because they are based there, and the composition of the of people who do the peer review of this creates bias towards accepting publication from certain parts of the world. So we need to think really how then for the developing world, which most of Africa is, what are the key benefits of a true open access, not pay to access or pay to publish models. But at this base of all this question sits, what are the research assessments and incentive for researchers in order for them to go into this type of science communication? I won't call it publication, I would call it science communication, because then it differs how you define research output for a researcher. Is it communication or we just talking paper? So when we look at the current models of publishing, we are talking now where you look at your academic impact. Again, when we go back to the introduction of this meeting, we want social justice, we want social impact. But what it has been shown currently is that most of the academic outputs or papers or manuscripts are geared towards academic impact. So I am a researcher, I'm in genetics, I write a paper in genetics that all my colleagues in genetics agree if it's correct or not, is acceptable to publish. You walk on the street, on the plant maybe I worked on, do you know who is Dr. Nokuthula Mchunu who worked on cannabis? No, because the communication that I do is for a selected few. So that impact that we have started to look at, the citation index, the impact factor, the age index, all these are relatively one type of metrics and are flawed, because I could have written a paper that every researcher in the field hates, and they have cited numerously to say this paper is bad, but I have a good citation, which the age index will go higher because my paper has been cited numerous times, but it's a negative citation. So we really need to think, what is the goal of publishing, of communicating our results? So this is where we need to think about comprehensive impact. So I am not, again, let me make it clear, I am not saying that scientific publishing as we know it now should go away completely. It has its role to play where we communicate in community of practice what we're doing, but it must not make a big chunk of our everyday life as researchers. Our everyday life should be mostly focused on making science to have an impact in our society. That also means communicating this impact to our communities, not only being completely absorbed into writing publication for only our community of practice. And this design, agreed, they will be complex and we need to rethink. We need to think alternative metrics into really understanding what is impact that we ask from our academics or researchers. And also when we then ask this, what are the rewards or incentives for the researchers to get involved into this? If I want to be a professor or an academic needs to be promoted, it is clearly stated that you need 10 research publications and some community engagement. This is what they will aim for. They will give you 10 publications. So, but if we say we need certain communication that shows that you've had an impact in the society, and we think, what does that mean? And then we reward the researchers based on that. They will then think differently. We need to have practices that change the behavior in institutions. Yes, government will play a role, but universities have a bigger role to change the way or the behavior of researchers by looking at their policies at incentivizing people who do research. Because I will state again, if we do not change these new promotional and incentive policies, the most important stakeholders in open science, the researcher who creates the data and deposits the data and uses the data that is available, will not participate in open science. And then open science will be a failed project because we have stuck to the way we reward and incentivize researchers. This is because it is just simple. We all know this is academics. You want professorship, you want to have certain amount of promotion of success, you need to have incentives and rewards. And right now, that means publishing in high impact journal, looking at patents, HI index, graduating students, and that's everybody looking at that. But we need to change this. We need to change the situation. We need to ask ourselves, how much do our researchers contribute to data that is useful for the society, that is useful for the community of practice? We could change the way, maybe cite data that produces publication, the way we cite research. Ask our researchers for an award or an incentive, you need to deposit a certain amount of data. And each different area of science or community of practice will define what it means for their data sets, what are the rules and how to go forward. How much of science communication do you do for the community? How much of really impactful project are we as researchers doing to the community? Again, impact doesn't mean only novelty, it means changing the way our society and making it better, making science works for social justice. So as my final comment, if we acknowledge the producers, or the knowledge producers refuse or reluctant to adopt open science, it will fail. It will fail. And we need to think, as most researchers and scientists, their data is their career. They are dependent on publication. But if we change and say that there is other ways to get into a career movement, not only by publication, then we will foster an environment that will allow people to get involved into this open science project via looking at the pillar of open science, communication, and publishing. So I'll stop there and thank everyone. These are the partners that we're working with, and we continue adding new partners into the project. And these are my contacts. I will leave them with Constant. And I'm happy to engage with anyone in this meeting or outside at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Knox. Can we show thumbs up for appreciation of Dr. Knox's beautiful and informative presentation? Yes, I also find it very informative, Doctor. Once more, thank you. If I can parallel with you, one thing that I take home from your presentation is that the culture of doing scientific research is being challenged. The traditional ways of doing science are really in question here, especially in the context of South Africa. We need, as you tabulated in your presentation, to see more of collaboration and dissemination of that scientific knowledge. If researchers are doing research, it doesn't help the situation, or it doesn't solve the global problems if all of that research is hidden behind the paywalls. Only those who have access can have access to that knowledge. So then it means the global problems, like we are talking today about the climate change and the global warming. And for instance, like yesterday, we were talking of COVID. How do people in communities reach out to that kind of knowledge to understand how to solve the problems that we have? Thank you very much, Doctor. It is promising. I'm listening to you in a librarian's perspective. I think there is future. All we need is to talk to one another. We need to communicate. We need to collaborate so that we have a better future. I'm going to take this moment to the audience. This is time now for questions. If you have burning questions for our presenter here, you can raise your hands. I'm going to take the first 3 people who wants to ask questions. We can also use the chat box to have comments and conversations going forward. But colleagues, help me out also to see hands if I'm unable of the first 3 burning questions to Dr. Mtunu. Thank you. For now, I'm unable to see hands. Colleagues, do you think you have questions for Doctor before she runs out of our screens? In the meantime, Doctor, can I ask you, I see your research focus also has something to do with COVID, but then it's explained in more scientific terms that I'm unable to understand. Can you maybe put it in lay format for me to understand, or for us to understand your research focus recently? I see your hand, Mr. Zungu. Let's just allow Doctor to answer to my question first.
Yeah, it was by coincidence, I would say, that I got into COVID research. As you know, I was an agricultural research council, so we really didn't do a lot of we don't do by our mandate, we didn't do a lot of human-based research. But because I was in the biotechnology platform, which really is a genomics platform in disguise, we were asked to help out to alleviate the load of COVID testing within Gauteng. So we did start doing work on diagnostic for COVID with NHLS in Gauteng. So we were doing quite a few samples per day. So in the same time, the Water Research Council was doing a lot of wastewater surveillance of COVID. And we were asked to get involved into doing this, into monitoring COVID, and we added other few bacterial diseases in the project. So we're really using a genomics surveillance tool in wastewater treatment. So we were doing a lot of water systems in Pretoria and Tshwane municipality, and we did some collaboration with the KZN municipality and the water chair of research that sits at DUT. So that was my involvement into creating, trying to create as early warning system as possible with when the COVID epidemic was at its height.
All right, thank you, Doctor. Thank you for that elaboration. I see the hands are up. I'll start with the first hand up. That was from Mr. Zungu. Mr. Zungu, can you unmute yourself and ask the question to Dr. Nokuthula?
Thank you, Constance. Good morning, Doc. Thank you very much for the presentation, and also because it's talking to us as a African citizen. So I would like to find out, Doc, in terms of the common challenges that you have experienced as you are pushing this agenda of African open science. what were those challenges? I'm asking the question because our continent it's a big and also deep rural, and then in terms of reaching the real community. So maybe if I'm making that as an example. So what were the most common challenges that you would have experienced as you are pushing the African open access? Thank you, Doc.
I think I will. I mean, as I said before I started, I'm in Benin, so we have a lot of collaborations that are here, but I think there's a lot of because Africa is not homogeneous, so the solutions for the problem are very different from each region. Because when I talk to stakeholders, for example, here, they find that although we are talking about access to publishing, they are talking to language barriers to publishing, because we are from the English-speaking country, so that for us is not a problem. For them, it's a major problem that most of the publication are in English, not in French. So just even the accessible publications are not enough for them to pass that barrier of actually enriching their research. So it's quite interesting. And I think some of the challenges, like, yes, we talk about open access publishing. I remember I talked to that particular colleague of mine who said that this publication requires $10,000 for APCs. So, I mean, in South Africa, some people are able to pay these APCs, but in some of the African countries, it's just simply unheard of. That $10,000 is the whole money to run a research for a whole year. So some of these challenges are very different. Some of them are similar, but the scale is different. So in Africa, I think the biggest challenge, we should not think that the open science initiatives or the solutions will be the same. They will be very different and will mean different things for different people. And this is what we have to come into grips with and come into understanding. And people will have different priorities to what they want to tackle in open science. Open science is a very complex thing we must acknowledge, because just talking about open access that we are talking about today is complicated in itself, because then you break it into communication and the reward system and what does those all things mean. So each person, my thing is that take what you think is a priority for each country and each institution at that institutional level and make it work. And little by little, it will come through. So if we take examples of people who are expert in the field of open science, like the European Open Science Cloud, which was started around 2010, and I speak to these colleagues every day, they're still not sure exactly where they are going. And in general, yes, Europe is not homogeneous, but the way they work is mostly closely and is easily could be transferable from one country to the next. But in Africa, this is simple, relatively not true. So we really have to think, what do you want to do with open science? And then each country really has to think that what is its imperative and what solution will need to happen. The other, I think the most important thing, yes, we talk about social justice. We talk about the obvious benefits of open science, but let's talk about how to do that, how to implement social justice. What does it mean to citizen science? What do we mean when we say we want citizens to be involved in science, truly take ownership? We need to envisage and have practicalities, and we need a lot of case studies to talk about this and see how it works. And again, it likely will not be the same going from one place to the next. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Doctor. You said a mouthful there. Second hand up for a question is from Ms. Takato. Ms. Takato, can you just unmute yourself and direct your question to Dr. Knox?
Thank you very much, Program Director. And thank you, Dr. Nkunu or Dr. Knox, as you prefer to be called, for a very thought-provoking presentation, and particularly looking at these issues of open access in terms of publications coming from a university. Partly of what I wanted to state or to comment on, you touched on in your previous response to the first question. I wanted to touch on the issue of rewards and incentives for our researchers, particularly when looking at issues of promotion, where as a university sector in South Africa, we really do focus much on academic impact, and not much is done in terms of, or is promoted in terms of societal impact, as you've put it, or comprehensive impact. And when we even look at our national evaluation systems, whether it be through the DHET output system, where universities are ranked based on the publication outputs that they have, and even looking at the NRF, yes, the NRF maybe ratings would consider issues of societal impact, but really mostly are at the high level of scientists where that is considered. So I guess my comment and maybe something for us to think about as a sector is, how do we as a nation start elevating the issues of societal impact and putting value to it, such that from a national level, and it's difficult for one university to start pushing it, or for us to do it on our own, in our own individual capacities. But when at a national level is looked at to see societal impact, and as you've said, in Europe, the UK system, the research evaluation framework does put a lot of emphasis on societal impact. And so this is something that we need to look at and to think about. We talk about decolonizing higher education. Maybe these are some of the aspects that will come into the discussion of decolonizing higher education. So thank you very much, Dr. Knox, for that. It was quite informative.
Yes, thank you. And I think you must keep an eye out. Probably the NRF Open Science Framework will come out for South Africa, which will talk to what is asked for from the researchers when they are using public funds into participating into open science framework. And also there is a framework that's probably gonna touch on the impact. What do we now mean when we say we assessing impact? I think these are important. So if we have these documents, and I think then institutions or universities can start making their own internal frameworks into looking at open science and impact together. We have also started conversation with USAF, where all the universities speak, to really think about how we can work open access and all these open science things, and then talk to the upper university structure in the long run into having a cohesive plan within is a different setting. But again, in other countries that we're talking to, we still implore universities to try to do the best as they can. Country policies or departmental policies have a big role to play, but universities at their macro level, micro level, can start something as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you, Ms. Menya, for raising that up. Really, as we commemorate the International Open Access Week, we need to extend our invitation to the policymakers, to the funders, to the government, to the researchers to come on table, and we have these kind of discussions and awareness. We'll move over into our program. Now I'm going to introduce to you, okay, I'm going there right now. I'm going to introduce our second speaker on the program. Her name is Ms. Takato Semenya. She is the director of the Sol Plaatje University Research Office. Just to give you a short bio, Mr. Kato Semenya holds a master's in business leadership degree from the University of South Africa, and she is pursuing her PhD, where her research focus is on knowledge translation within the South African research ecosystem. Like I mentioned, she is our research office director at Sol Plaatje. She previously worked at the Southern African Research and Innovation Management Association, that is SARIMA, as a project specialist. Prior to this, she was the research office manager at Sefako Mahato Health Science University. Kato has also worked as a part-time research management consultant on various projects within SARIMA, DHET, and the University of Pretoria. She experiences gathered from working across disciplines over the years. She has gathered experiences, right, and has helped her out to develop a good understanding of the growing field of research management, and she is passionate to see the practice grow into a fully recognized profession across South Africa. Although we are 2 minutes ahead of the program, I would like to hand over to you, Ms. Semenya, to share to us your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just confirm that my screen is showing?
Yes, correct.
Okay, I'll just switch on my video for a short while so that you can just have a look at the person who is speaking on the other end. As I've been introduced, my name is Takato Semenya, and I'm just going to do a very short presentation based on our university and how we are beginning in open science. We are fairly new as a university. We are just celebrated our 8th year in existence. So we're one of the 3 new universities that were opened in the post-democratic South Africa. So I'm just going to put my presentation on slide mode. I hope that is that. Okay, so this is the presentation outline. I'll just go briefly through our strategic plan 2020 to 2024 as a university, and then just touch on openness in research at SPU in terms of what is happening for us to promote open science. Our strategy 2020 to 2024, so we are in the middle of the strategy as a university, and our vision as Sol Plaatje is that we are a university, or we want to see ourselves being a university which is critically engaged in learning, research, and development while enhancing democratic practice and social justice in society. And I've just highlighted the statements of democratic practice and social justice because this was really highlighted by the first 2 speakers in terms of what, when we talk about open science, what the drive and the aim is. It's really about social justice. And as a university, this is our our vision as well. So as a university, we need to figure out what do we mean by social justice when it comes to promoting openness, and open science, as has been said, is quite broad in its concepts. So we have 5 goals. Goal number 1 being that we want to be research active and prioritize niches within a supportive institutional environment and culture. Goal number 2 is to deepen the academic program and its orientation to quality teaching. And goal number 5 is about community engagement as a scholarly activity. Now, I put these 3 goals, goal 1, 2, and 5, as part of the 3 pillars that most universities and many universities are founded upon. And these have been our strategic goals and our strategic goals as a university, and they are underpinned by goal number 3 and goal number 4, which is to be a digitally empowered university, and goal number 4 is about financial sustainability. So that is our strategic objectives and goals as Sol Plaatje University. I'm just going to run over this one here because I want to focus on the research goal, which is becoming research active and prioritize niches. And these are the strategies that have been formulated for us to become research active. It was the establishment of a research office, which we started in the end of 2019. So we're just about to finish 3 years having a research office. We need to develop research and supervision capabilities, establish strategic research partnerships, develop research themes and centers, and mobilize research funding. Now, within that is our research values, which we espouse as a university. I'm not going to go through all of them. We've listed them there, but I just highlighted some that I believe really speak to this concept of openness, open science, or open access, as we're talking about. And that is that we uphold the value that publicly that our research outputs must be publicly accessible, and that we're promoting cross-disciplinary, interinstitutional, and international collaborations. And I've also highlighted the value of upholding best ethical standards and integrity, because I believe that is something that that really underpins openness or anything else that has to do with research and the academic project. Now, I thought of including these conceptual constructs as part of this presentation. And I'm glad that Dr. Knox kind of touched on these when she talked about openness, and that openness, it's about social justice. And when we talk about social justice, we're talking about accessibility, we're talking about equity, we're talking about justice. And as a university, we use these conceptual constructs in how we look at capacity development for both our students and staff members. And I thought these are actually quite important to include in the talk about openness and how we promote, or we would like to promote openness as a university. That we need to think about access, we need to think about inclusion, and we need to think about success. Now, the way that these concepts are captured here, they're mainly looking inward in terms of our staff and student support services. But we need to then take these outwards. How do we promote access for the communities that we are working with in terms of the knowledge that is produced from the university and how knowledge is produced? And I think that's one of the things that also Dr. Knox touched on. When do we actually start including the community in the research life cycle? Because in most cases, we talk about including the community or community engagement at the end of the research process, where we've come up with a problem, we've done the research, now we're communicating and disseminating the results of the project. But really, when we look at community engagement and community involvement in the research life cycle, the community needs to be included from the beginning, because when we're saying that we're solving and looking at solving live problems, we need the community to help us to think what are the problems that they are facing. We need policymakers to help us to know what are the gaps that they're experiencing in terms of policy, and how do we, as in the academic sphere, come together and put our minds together with society to be able to come up with research problems that can be looked at, and so the solutions will be more applicable than if we're doing it in isolation. So that's the construct of access, and as well as inclusion. How inclusive are we, to community, and not only community, but within academia as well. How inclusive are we for students as well, in terms of the knowledge that is produced within universities? And here we have as our third construct, the construct of success. How do we then say that we have been successful? And so how do we measure what we have done and say that we have been successful in promoting openness in our universities? So these are really constructs that we've used in capacity development, but they can be constructs that we can use in terms of looking at openness for the university. As a university, we've just recently, you've seen there, one of the strategic objectives was to set research themes. We've just research in VISO, we looked at priority research themes, and these are the three that we've looked at, considering our geographic location as a university, the communities around us, and considering the size of our universities. We really want to be known for something. So in as much as we are contributing to the research ecosystem, but we also want to stand out and be known to be set apart for something. And these are the three themes: data sciences, heritage studies, and desert studies or arid zone studies. I included these here because looking at the theme for the week this year, which is open science for climate justice, I really think that our research themes really touch on the issue of climate justice when we're talking about desert or arid zones, even data sciences that can be used to look at climate research, climate change research. And therefore, we need to now start looking at how do we promote openness when we focus on our priority research themes as stated in the slide. Now, looking at some of the work that we're doing in terms of openness in research at SPU, we're starting off first by looking at our policy on research that we have as a university. We are not explicit, and maybe that is something that we need to look at in terms of our policy. And I'm glad that the framework, the national framework on open science, will be released soon. I know that there are national roadmaps from other countries. So we need to also be explicit. We talk about, as I mentioned in the research values, we talk about our output being publicly accessed. So the concept is there, but it's not explicit in terms of linking it to the various concepts of open science, which can be open data, open review, open access, and all the other concepts that go into it. We talk about it from the university's standpoint, and we talk about it from the researcher's standpoint in the policy on research. We also have support structures that we have in terms of research publication. And in our research publications guide, we do provide quite sufficient information on open scholarship and open science and the different constructs that go under open science. And this is a way, again, of promoting awareness to our researchers and of encouraging our researchers to look into it. And we also provide internal funding for article processing charges. And, this discussion will always come up. As we know that article processing charges do not necessarily are not necessarily the same as open science, but we know that most of the open access journals do charge article processing charges, and it has been touched on by Dr. Knox and some of the comments that I read as well, that the ridiculous amounts that some of the publishers are really expecting our academics to take into consideration the issue of inclusion. So they become exclusive for many of our African researchers. Looking at ourselves as Sol Plaatje University, as I said, we're quite new. We're on a different funding model from the other universities, so we do not receive the publication subsidy as other universities does. So we're really dependent on the council-controlled funds for us to be able to support our researchers for APCs. And it's a very small pot, and it's growing less and less every year. And we have seen, charges of about $900 US. And we do encourage our researchers to say, look, most of or some of the publishers are willing to consider discounts for people coming from LMICs. But we're finding that some of the publishers now are focusing on the low-income countries and not the middle-income countries, which South Africa is now considered as a middle-income country. And therefore, our researchers would then not get the discounted APCs. But I know that with the libraries are looking at really doing quite a concerted drive at approaching these big publishers to say, please, can you consider lowering the APCs for our researchers? So that is some of the support that we're considering, but we need to look at how sustainable is it for us to continue supporting these large APCs for open access. Also do have an institutional repository. I know that with the director for libraries, we've been talking about the possibilities of an institutional data repository, and also looking at open data repositories with other universities as well. This is just to show our DHET publication units count. It's quite minimal, comparatively speaking, in the sector, but we are growing. This is one of the ways as well that we're promoting openness. When we're looking at our university publications, we do not yet have the sophisticated software that will do the analytics in terms of the open, the publications that our researchers are having in open access journals. But just looking at the DOAJ lists, how many of our staff members are publishing in DOAJ list, which DHET introduced as an approved list. So for 2021 and 2022, we're almost at a similar percentage of 17% of our researchers are publishing in the DOAJ list. I know that some of the publications in Scopus and Web of Science and the other indices are also open access. So we need to explore and look at which of those are open access so that we can have a real picture of where our academics are publishing and how many or what percentage is publishing in open access journals. Also, the issue of collaboration is also something that touches on openness as well. And we're seeing really, when we're looking at our publications, we're seeing that a good percentage, I think it's over 75% of our academics are publishing collaboratively, meaning that they are working in collaborations. And most of these are with external people, national and international people. And so that is also something that we're doing is to encourage collaboration, and that encourages openness as well. Some of the ongoing work is to continue building awareness on openness, as you said, looking at the various national roadmaps and looking at the National Open Science Framework when it comes into play, that we promote internal awareness for our researchers on this. And this one on dispelling myths and fears. You know, Dr. Knox put it quite nicely in, I think it was her last slide, where she said that if the academics or the researchers don't buy into openness, I'm just paraphrasing, then it's going to fail. And so this is part of dispelling myths, because we've seen that our academics have this anxiety and fear about sharing, whether it be sharing their data or sharing the methodology that they use, or sharing just any outcome of their research. There is a certain level of fear, and that again is connected with the idea of there is still competition in the system for promotion, for various ratings and evaluations. So we need to dispel these myths and fears of not wanting to share, of you know, fearing to share from our researchers. And we continue to support initiatives for reduced APCs, as I said, through the library. There's the National Library Consortium that as they approach the publishers for reduction, that we stand together with the sector, with the other universities to support the reduction of APCs for our researchers. And as I said, that openness goes together with ethics and integrity. So the promoting a culture of ethical conduct, promoting a culture of integrity within research will go a long way as well in terms of promoting openness for research at Sol Plaatje, and I suppose in any other platform or institution. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I used this poster here that we recently had our student conference for our postgraduate students. And I just really like what is stated at the bottom, that powering the future everywhere for everyone. And that for me really captures what openness is about. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you, Ms. Semenya. Thank you for taking us through into understanding the SPU Research Office and the support that is currently doing. Let me see thumbs up for Ms. Takatsu. It's time for us to take questions for Ms. Semenya. Yes, I see hands up. I'm not sure now if it's thumbs up for Ms. Semenya or it's the question time. Okay, let's do it again. Now it's time for questions for Ms. Semenya around her presentation. Really, colleagues, the goal here is around transparency. Transparency of the research processes and the methods that are used. We know that funding is what drives research. The issue now here of the cost of article processing fees. Maybe it's a challenge for the CenFreeSol also to look at. Maybe in future consider establishing their own open journal system. The three directors, Dr. Sabelo, Mepetsi, and Ms. Molopiane, is it possible looking into the future? Because really now, if it's not the publishing system that is currently working, if it's not sustainable, then it's not solving the problems, the current problems that we face in the globe as well. Okay, any questions for Ms. Takatsu? Okay, no questions. Thank you once more, Ms. Takatsu. Now I come to an end of my part in the program. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Zungu to take us through to the next slot in the program. Thank you very much. You were a wonderful audience. Thank you and bye.
Thank you very much, Constance, for facilitating our first session. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Emmanuel Zhou. I'm a librarian at Central University of Technology in the Faculty of Engineering, Build and Information Technology. My role for today is to introduce our speakers. I will start by introducing Professor Bangoli Auzi. That will be our first speaker for this session. Professor Bangoli Auzi is an associate professor in the Department of Built Environment in the Faculty of Engineering, Build and Information Technology at the Central University of Technology in Free State, South Africa. He holds a PhD in the built environment, that is a construction project management, from the University of Salford in UK, and the MSc in construction project management from the Robert Gordon University in Scotland. He is a rated researcher of the South African National Research Foundation, that is NRF. He has co-authored over 120 peer-reviewed publications comprising of 63 journal articles, 56 conference papers, 5 book chapters, and 2 books. Furthermore, Prof has to his credit 3 successful completed doctorate degree supervisions and 10 successful completed master's degree supervisions. Furthermore, he is currently an associate editor of the Built Environment Project and Assets Management, which is known as a BPEM journal, a Q1 journal published by the Emerald Publishing, as well as the Frontiers in the Sustainable Organizations, a special journal published by the Frontiers Publishing. He is also a member of a board of reviewers for the Springer book series, that is Strategies for Sustainability. His research interests lie within the remit of the smart, sustainable, and secular built environment knowledge domain. He can be contacted via his email on b.auzi@cut.ac.za. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you. I'm just trying to share my slide now. Just let me know when you can see my slide.
Please evacuate the library.
Yeah. Can you see my slide now?
Yes, Prof. Absolutely. I can. We can be able to see your slide. Thank you.
Please note that the library is experiencing a water challenge. For that reason, the library is going to close.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Zungu, for the wonderful introduction. I didn't expect it was going to be that long. I was thinking it was going to be an abridged version. And thank you for the invitation to speak at this auspicious event to mark our Open Science Week here between the Free States, between the Soplaki University, Central University of Technology, as well as peers from the University of the Free State. So I'll start now. The outline of my presentation, which is titled Debunking Myths Associated with Open Access Publishing, Perspectives from a Mid-Career Researcher, would start by with an introduction to look at, from the introduction, we're looking at understanding open access publishing, what does it entail, and how did it come about. I'll also be trying to explore the benefits, or to elucidate the benefits, disadvantages, and then share a little bit about my personal reflections that I believe have been engendered by my reliance or my desire to align my personal philosophies towards open access publishing in recent times, and for concluding. So as you can see,
Prof, I'm not sure whether it's only on my side. You have your screen has freeze.
To drive society's quest for advancement, society's quest for resilience, society's quest for improved well-being of the citizenry and increased productivity. So society expects us as researchers, or as academics and as researchers, to lead in this, on the front, to be in the frontier of the quest for sustainable futures. And this we must do by listening to society and by trying to integrate or incorporate societal features and tenets into what we do, both in a transparent manner. As you can see, that taxpayers have continued to fund this publicly owned universities, and as well try to ensure that we have the resources that we need as universities to continue to develop knowledge and to become innovative, or more innovative in what we do. This quest has led to a transition, or what I'll call a transition, across generations for universities. As you can see on the table on the right-hand side there, that we've moved from the kind of outputs that are required from just merely professionals in the first generation universities to having professionals, scientists, entrepreneurs, and competitive local economy. So you can see that the relevance of what we do, the studies that we do, the research that we do on the local economy has become buttressed or elucidated in recent times. And again, these transformations have also, that I've just mentioned in universities, as positioned universities as...
Sorry, Prof.
Yeah, yes.
I'm not sure whether it's happening on my side. The slide is not moved. I'm not sure whether it's or maybe other colleagues are experiencing that.
Oh, I don't know. I'm on the second slide now. Can you see the second slide?
Oh, yes, yes. No, thanks. It was on my side. Thank you, Prof. You can continue.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry for that. So basically, peer-reviewed, and what I'm trying to say was that these transformations that we've talked about have since positioned us as universities as critical players in the triple, quadruple, or quintuple helix models of innovation, as well as what we now term the university knowledge technology transfer ecosystems. One of such ways through which we, as researchers, disseminate or engage with our local communities with the outputs of our research is through peer-reviewed publications. However, access to these publications by the relevant stakeholders, not just within academia, but again in policy and in business communities, has remained limited due to barriers, access barriers, okay, which include high access prices and copyright issues. Publishers, because I work with some of these publishing houses, publishers have actually attributed the preponderance or the causes of these barriers to the rising production costs and distribution costs that are associated with trying to disseminate these publications to the relevant stakeholders. As such, like previous speakers have agreed, society is mostly deprived from benefiting from the novel work that we carry out as researchers in universities globally. And this is particularly the case in developing countries, where the dollar-denominated fees charged by some of these publishers for guaranteeing APC for open access in the event that we want to go the gold access route, have kept researchers and stakeholders at bay as a result of the exchange rates that are prevailing and poorly funded institutions and most of these clients. So for the public, I think they would look at it as from the perspective of double dipping, where they look at why do they have to still spend more money on trying to provide or to gain access to these publications or outcomes of whatever research they have paid us to do, or which they're paying the investors to do. And again, if we also look at the comparison and carry out a comparison between the degree of effort that has been put in by publishing houses on one hand and scholars on the other hand, in bringing about new knowledge to society, okay, you would notice an uneven relationship between both parties. For example, whilst publishers have profited from such scholarly publications, disseminating them from a monetary perspective, scholars have relied on an assessment of the impact of their publications for self-gratification, or perhaps things that have to do with promotions and all that in the universities. If you look at the table on the other side, on the right-hand side, that article there, it would show you that, for instance, the rise in the prices of journal articles have outpaced inflation by 250% over the past 30 years. And this shows you that actually, yes, please.
Sorry, this is Dora speaking. It seems like your slides are not moving. Can I take over your slides and share your slides?
Okay, it's fine then, please.
Can you just stop sharing, and on which slide are you now?
Slide 5, I think, 4, yeah. Wait, on the state open access.
Okay, yes, just hold on.
So slide 5.
Or 5, is it that one? Professor, is this the slide that you are on?
No, that's 3.
5. This is
move another 2, correct?
More.
Askies. See that one?
No,
now yours are
3,
not moving.
Sorry. Sorry, it seems like I'm making it worse. Sorry for that.
That's fine.
Now
you've gone further back, so you have to go back to 5. Slide 5 or 14, actually.
That one.
Yes, this one.
Yes. Okay. Is that what everybody can see now?
Yes.
I can see this now. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Dora, we can see.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues. Sorry for the interruption. Prof, sorry, continue.
No, it's fine. I think it's technology. No, apologies. So I think from what I was saying before the second man came in, what I was trying to say is that publishers have, it would appear that publishers have benefited more than scholars who are actually creating this knowledge that is being disseminated. And society has been put in the situation where they actually have to engage in what I would term as double dipping, where they have to still fund the universities and still commit funds towards having access to knowledge that we're disseminating in the society. And from the table, the article by the Spitzman on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that journal prices have actually risen or considered to have risen in a manner that outpaces inflation by 250% over the past 30 years. So that shows that most of the publishing houses are actually smiling to the banks at the detriment of society and scholars in the university. Next slide, please. So could you go to slide 5? This next slide. Okay. So here, when we talk about, for us as academics, what we actually get as usually the impact. We'll talk about impact. We'll talk about we're assessed, the outcome of our, or the quality of our publications are assessed from an impact perspective. What is the impact of what we publish? And how do we achieve those impacts? How do we arrive at those impacts? So the metrics for measuring impacts, or parameters for measuring impacts, have usually revolved around journal quality, have revolved around publication or article quality, where we're looking at the kind of citations that we have, and also things like personal or developmental measures, like your H-index that you have as a researcher. So judging from these parameters, it becomes obvious the nexus between the access, improved access to publications by society, the scholar's quest for recognition, societal recognition, and self-gratification as well, and society's expectations from universities can easily be discerned. So you'd see that there is an increasing need for from the university's perspective and from the publishing house's perspective concerning what society desires from our research or from what we do in universities. And I'm happy we're talking about open access this week. However, this advocacy for open access research did not just start today. If we look at initiatives like the Budapest Open Access Initiative, as far back as in 2002 or 21 years ago, and the Beseda Statement on Open Access Publishing, which is also dated about 20 years ago, and the Berlin Declaration on Open Access, we can see that there has been some move or traction in the past towards having or widening access to people or to society to actually engage with the studies or the research that we do within this ivory towers. And so open access is usually described as, it's commonly described as publication of scholarly material, which is freely available, digital and online, and often with less encumbering copyright barriers for authors and users alike to enable actual engagement with what is being done. Next slide, please. Yeah, so research findings are actually meant for public consumption, and that is what science is all about. That is what science engagement is all about, as being propagated by most of the funding bodies that we have, both within South Africa and internationally. And we tend to ask this question: if we limit access to a broader spectrum of society, the question would be, of what use would such discoveries that we make be if they are hidden from the intended audience and cannot be eventually put to use? And this leads us to something that I consider that is reported in the scriptures for those of us who are religious, where we talk about, neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify God in heaven. And with this, you can see that there is need for us to continue to ensure that the good works that we do, the research that are being carried out in universities, are accessible and by a broader spectrum of society. And this has been enabled by the emergence of digital technologies and improved networking capabilities. As such, we now have access to more articles and people are able to actually see what we do. People are actually able to critique what we do. And this has led to an improvement in the value or quality of what we send out to community and society. With this, we're able to see the impact of this across board. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So there are certain benefits that have been that accrue from open access publishing. I think that's one slide back. Thanks. So there are certain benefits that are accruing from open access publishing, and this was actually sourced from the work that was done by Burr et al. In 2015. Here we see things like success factors like democratization. So with this, we're having access, improving access to what we do, to the research or the knowledge that's being created in universities, regardless of income categorizations of users. We're also deepening the levels of diffusion of knowledge into all societal areas. So it's not just about high tech or low tech, but again, across board. We're also increasingly relying on education. Okay, teaching these materials to teach and learn for teaching and learning purposes, according to the scientific state of art. Again, well, galvanizing citizen science, participation of stakeholders who wouldn't ordinarily be interested in what we do as researchers. But now, because of the fact that open access has happened to all of us, it becomes easier for people to get access to this knowledge, for people to exhibit behavioral changes or witness behavioral changes, to drive knowledge in a manner that is for the betterment of society. Again, for health purposes as well, it's leading to up-to-date information for doctors and patients alike. It's leading to research efficiency, where because of the fact that knowledge is openly accessible these days, increasingly accessible these days to many people, we have witnessed a decline in the duplication of research activities within contexts. We've also arrived at the cutting edge of research, thereby encouraging innovation. And we are sure, and the public is now being more confident or reposing more confidence in universities by relying on what is coming out from these universities in engendering or in making laws and policies for the community. Again, something that applies to me is the issue of interdisciplinarity. With increasing open access, we're able to build stronger networks, collaborative networks across board, across disciplines, across geographical contexts, enhancing knowledge networks, our participation in these knowledge networks, particularly in a developing country context, where self-help has become the norm rather than an exception. And we're also allowing for more publishers to have access to the market. Previously, the publication domain or publishing house domain was restricted to what we used to call the big three or big four. But now we have a lot more publishers coming in, both a local context, within local context and within the broader global context. Next, please. Now, I understand that there are also misgivings about open access publishing. One of the major challenges or major drawbacks of open access publishing has been the tendency for people to believe that or associate open access with predatory journals. Now, that is one of the myths that has to be debunked, because irrespective of the fact that there are many predatory journals that have come into the space and offer cheaper access to or reduced cost of prices for publishing, there are still opportunities to publish open access with the big reputable journals, publishers that we have, like Elsevier, like Springer, even with Emerald. However, there are different approaches to this. For example, Emerald, Elsevier is on record as having 500 titles that are being published open access currently. So there are different approaches to open access. And we understand, for instance, when we talk about the cost issues, which previous speakers have enunciated, we find out that it's not just, we mustn't really go the gold access route, which is very, very expensive for most researchers, particularly in the developing world context or in the global south. There are opportunities to publish using the green open access route. Even if it means the investor doesn't have this repository, we can always have or rely on other repositories like ResearchGate, but ensuring that we don't put up the actual or the eventually published paper, but rather maybe an accepted version of this paper, and that is allowed. I do that a lot with some of my publications, and people are able to access them. But however, I have to give control to who, or give access, permission to whoever is going to access them. And there is also the perception that open access publishing leads to reduced quality assurance. And that is also not true. I think we'll talk about it in the next slide. Yeah, perhaps possibly for myself, I've had my papers, some of my publications or research studies or submissions rejected by this seemingly this open access journals like MDPI and all that, for reasons that border on what is expected and the feedback that was received from a peer review process. So it's not a given, like some would want to think, that once it's being published open access, then it means that and you're paying an APC that is outlandish for a publication to happen, and that would be an incentive for the publisher to publish whatever is not really of essence to the body of practice or to the knowledge community. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are some of the myths that are associated with, which I talked about debunking, some of the myths that surround open access publishing. For instance, a study by Suber tries to show us that open access publishing does not actually bypass quality peer review, like I had mentioned. It doesn't also try to reform, violate, or abolish copyrights. You still have, as an author, you're still expected to retain your copyrights over some publications by some journal publishers, while others would ask for that copyright to be transferred to them. It doesn't also deprive royalty earning authors of legitimate income. Like Mr. Zwingli had mentioned, I have written a couple of books, and those books, I still receive royalty for them, even though one of them is open access now. Again, it doesn't deny the reality of the costs that are associated with production of scientific works. Neither does it suppress academic freedom. Rather, it encourages academic freedom, because I have potentials of looking at other studies that report on similar things or points of interest, and I can actually critique or try to look at what has been the values that are driving that feedback that is coming out from the other paper or the other study. It doesn't relax rules against plagiarism, neither does it support boycotting of any kind of literature or publisher. So one of the challenges is that open access hasn't or doesn't guarantee universal access, because like you all know, we still have challenges that have to do with censorship, that have to do with language and handicap access, as well as connectivity barriers, particularly in the developing country context. On the right-hand side, there are some of the other myths that have been put up close by Tennant et al., particularly about preprints. Some of us believe that, like the previous speaker had mentioned, the competition that we have or that we experience among academics, where people tend to hide what they're doing, the methodologies and the findings, because they don't want it to be stolen by others. Now we see with the democratization of knowledge that has happened, you could have your preprints out there and you can get feedback even before, with which to improve the quality of the publication before it gets eventually published. So where most of these publishers are democratizing the space, where we don't just rely on feedback from 2 or 3 reviewers that are statutorily appointed, but again, you could tend to get feedback from people who are critical stakeholders within your community of practice, and even from our host, from the community that you're intending to provide solutions to a problem that might be there. We're also seeing that there is emphasis on issue about copyright transfer that is required. This is not really procedural, because some publishing houses would allow you to retain your copyright, while some might ask for it to be transferred. So it's not really a given that it must be transferred, and once it's transferred, the author doesn't have any right to them anymore. Again, the approval by peer review proves that you can trust a research article, but that is not really true. That's not really the case, because remember that the appointment of reviewers is subjective, usually a subjective thing on conventional, traditional journals. So when we go open access and when we look at issues about preprints or the need for preprints, for example, the feedback that you get, you must remember that preprints are not really final articles. They're articles on the process. So you tend to get feedback from community and people who are outside this remit of or this circle of appointed reviewers to give you feedback. So there are a lot of advantages that come with publishing open access as against disadvantages that we've mentioned. And these myths that have been presented here show that have been debunked by previous authors, by Suber and Tennant, show that there is some significance that is accruable from publishing open access. Next slide, please. Yeah, so a personal reflection. I think this is like my profile from ResearchGate and from Google Scholar. The QR code on your right is to see, you could take a picture of that to assess it, to see the articles or the kind of manuscript that are in my profile. With this, you would see that I've gained the most citations for articles that I've published open access. And since 2017, I have moved, I had no H-index in 2017, and today I have 12, an H-index of 12. And again, I've published between 2017 and I've gotten about 670 citations for my publications. Whilst I understand that this is one of the ways, a very nuanced way of judging impact, I believe that if authors within your community of practice or knowledge community are citing your work, that implies that it's of relevance to them, and it shows that they're able to assess it and they're able to use that as a scaffold to build new knowledge or to create more or come about newer inventions or innovations in the practice. And that is this is one of the reasons why I tend to support open access publications. And I noticed that there's a challenge, again, going back to the issue of cost. One of the things that I've done within my period of employing the academia is to leverage on my broader networks. So oftentimes I have colleagues who are working in countries like Sweden, in the Scandinavian countries, and in China, where there are incentives or where there are blanket approvals for publishing, for public APC costs for publishing open access. And we tend to leverage on those connections and those possibilities or opportunities in those clients through co-authoring papers and through carrying out jointly funded projects across the world. Next slide, please. Yeah, so to conclude, I believe that open access publication has come to stay, and it can only be improved upon, particularly with the emerging framework for open access and the inclusion of the Directory for Open Access Journals on the approved DETs list. Again, we understand that it remains a credible business model for enabling better engagement with scholarly research outputs in a cost-effective manner. It's, as is the case with every new business, it might be very expensive at this point, but when we broaden or widen access, I believe that this APC costs will start coming down, particularly for us in middle-income countries and low-income countries. I've benefited from this transition as a researcher, and this is evident in what I've shown. And if you have accessed the QR code or my profile via the QR code, you'd see that this is very evident. However, we need an increased number of information sessions just like this to improve the level of awareness and acceptance among relevant stakeholder groups to better propagate this gospel of open access publishing and open science. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the very informative information that you have just shared with us. I know you quoted in the Holy Book when you said you cannot light a light and then put under the table. You have to put it on top of the table so that it can help anyone in the room, which really, Prof, it's very true, because I'm also taken to the Holy Book, which says the best things normally are free. The best things are free. So, but then the notion of saying everything has to be behind the paywall. We are not so sure where is it emanating from, because if you can check, we are currently having the electricity that we are paying, but then we are not sure whether at the end of the day we'll be having the electricity. But then we've got the sun. That is, we are definitely sure that it's going to come, and then we can even predict the time, what time the sun will come out. So what I'm trying to say is that best things are free in life in general. However, there is a notion of that we have to, everything has to be behind the paywall. So I've got a question which is which goes with the comment, Prof. In terms of the myth, do we know that is surrounding the open access? Do we know where the myths emanate from? And then what is the agenda, or what is the motive behind the myth that we find ourselves that we have to deal with such a myth? And also in terms of the researchers, researchers fraternity, how does the myth play the role of researchers not being able or not willing or maybe reluctant to publish on the open access? Thank you, Prof.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. And to start with, I agree with the comment that the best things in life are actually free. However, you must understand that there has been a transition from life as it is to life as it ought to be. And we also have to understand the fact that there's a growing population, and everybody's also trying to become more entrepreneurial. And that has also been the case with the publishing houses that have moved beyond trying to widen or broaden the horizon for science towards profit making or profiteering in a legal way. So that, I think that is one of the things that has sustained when we start looking at the fact that we must also make ends meet as publishers, because in the previous time, in previous era, these publishers, like I said, had dominion over this landscape for publishing research. And with this, there was a badge, okay? You're either publishing with Emerald, you're either publishing with this as a researcher who wants to grow in a particular body of practice, in a particular community of practice. And that had led the research fraternity to align with these actual journal titles or publishing houses. For example, for us in the built environment, there are some journals that if you want to become internationally visible and renowned, you must publish with these journals. And this is a reputation that has been built over time. So these journals would not really want to allow or freely hand over this competition or this privilege, I would say, to competitors easily. And that is one of the things that are sustained. And some of us as researchers have lived to this legacy of us being associated with particular publishers or particular journal titles. Okay, and irrespective of the fact that it might be not pay, it might be not support open access in the first part. But now, as things have evolved, because of the fact that community, like I said in my presentation, community is now demanding for more. You cannot, people are becoming wiser and asking, well, what has happened to the investments that we've made? What has happened to community engagement? What has happened to the fact that most of us in the academic fraternity are doing what is called blue sky research, which has no direct impact on the host communities. We have also started now transiting from just being centers of knowledge creation to being champions of societal change, to being, through the kind of people we graduate, through the kind of outputs that come out from our research, through the kind of commercialization potentials that lie with our research. So with that, we need to now start subjecting our research to public scrutiny. We need to now start asking people to actually provide feedback, input, not just reserved for academics in the review process that journals do, but leaving it out for everybody to actually make an input. And that is what has sustained this increasing transition or trend movement towards open access. So I think I've answered your question.
Yes, absolutely, Prof. Thank you very much. At this point, colleagues, I will open an opportunity if there's anyone who want to ask Prof a question. Please feel free to raise your hand and ask the question.
Mr. Zungu, there's a question in the comments box, the chat box.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let me quickly go there.
I've seen it.
Oh, okay. Yes, you can go ahead, Prof, and then answer.
Okay, thank you. It's a question that is asking about what my view is about comparing traditional publishing and the new publishing model that is sort of open access. Well, I think there's not a lot that is different. For instance, when you're going to traditional publishing, as a researcher who spends time, I'm on the editorial review board of more than 7 journals and 7 international journals, and I do a lot of reviews per week. In some years, like for example, this year, not to exaggerate, I've done about 47 reviews for the Journal of Clinical Production this year alone. And in an event where it's not allowed to be open access, my time that I use in carrying out this review processes are totally unpaid for, but just justifies my presence or relevance within the body of practice or the knowledge community. But now the publisher derives an immense benefit by restricting access and charging fees for access to this publication. So what we're trying to push from our side, unlike when we look at it from the open access ones, it becomes, there are some open access journals in Wiley and all that are not charging any money. So we mustn't really construe to say open access has to do with costs or has to do with payment of APC charges. In most places, some of these journals, we don't have that. We have the options. And like I mentioned, the new publishing model, when I talked about the the green access route and the golden route. The green access route still allows you, if your university has a repository, to put in most of your paper up to the point of acceptance. The paper that's not been published but has been accepted, you still allow that right to, you still hold the copyright and you're expected to upload that on your institutional repository. Although you might have an embargo period of a year or more or 6 months, but at least that allows that allows people to access that publication at no cost at all. So we mustn't construe. So for me, I believe that in a manner that makes it mutually beneficial to both parties, the academic practice and the publishing house and communities as well. The new publishing models are actually better or fare better in that regard compared to traditional publishing models, particularly as it concerns things like the peer review process. I've made allusions to the fact that when we go through what we call the preprint, we usually have feedback. There was a study we did on COVID in 2020, and it had more than 1,000 reads in less than a day. And we got feedback, my co-authors and I got feedback that we used to improve on the paper before it was eventually published. We held the feedbacks and we incorporated into the paper when it had gone through the first round of review. And that has led that today has about 146 citations, and it was just published in 2020. So that's something that doesn't necessarily happen with traditional publishing models.
Yes. No, thank you very much, Prof. I'm not sure if there's another question in the house.
Yeah, I think there is one by Dr. Moshe Mosoto that talks
oh,
about,
yes.
Yeah. So I think
please unmute and go ahead.
Yeah, so it's more about, I said the question is more about why can't you have a universal standard for publishing, like open access? But like I said in my presentation, that we have open access does not deny the fact that there are costs associated with publishing, even for the domain registration, even for having to host the domain that has these publications where we can actually, these publications are being hosted. So there must be a fee. So we must have to maybe work out a model for paying for those fees. If we're going to go the non-profit route, it's also a possibility, but there must be fees that are associated with publishing open access. So we can't really have a universal access unless somebody's paying for it. And like I gave an example, in the Scandinavian countries, there are a lot of like in Norway, Sweden, and all that. There are governments are busy, and even in the Netherlands, government is busy providing that support. So they wouldn't be paying as much as we pay for APC fees because they are actually subscribing to a particular cohort of universities that provide a blanket fee or blanket payment towards this. So thank you.
No, thank you very much, Prof. We really appreciate, and also for making time to come and share this valuable information with us. We really appreciate. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you for having me, colleagues. Thank you. Right.
Thank you. Colleagues, we are moving because we are behind a bit of time. So our next speaker, I'm going to introduce Mr. Nicholas. I believe it's Mr. Nicholas Combrink. Is a database scientist with a specialization in applied data science and autonomous design, making in artificial intelligence. He was appointed the interim co-director of the Interdisciplinary Center for Digital Future in the University of the Free State. Thank you very much. You can take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to see if my sound quality is there and whether you can hear me if I'm audible.
Yes, it's absolutely clear, and we can also see your slide.
Fantastic. This is good. Thank you so much, colleagues, and what a wonderful, if I can just say, the presentations up to now, what a wonderful way in which it's been facilitated. So thank you so much to the facilitators and the organizers as well. We are going to, we are both, myself and Professor Katinka de Wet, are the interim co-directors for the Interdisciplinary Center for Digital Futures at the University of the Free State. And we're really just going to talk about big data and open science and more or less what that looks like. So in a nutshell, and I think a lot of us are well aware, let's just define some of these terms a little bit. You know, so what is data? So when a lot of people talk about data, what are we talking about? And we're really talking about quantities, characters, symbols, sounds, images, text, numbers, spreadsheets, tabular data, structured data, unstructured data, on which different operations are performed. A good example is the data that is currently being used, the audio information, the visual information, the tabular information, the HAR files to make this bidirectional conversation we're having at the moment possible. And it really has to do with the way in which we store information, transmit information over digital platforms in the form of certain electrical and computational signals so that it can be recorded on magnetic, optical, mechanical recording devices, so such as computers or tablets or certain digital information and communication technologies. Now, this definition of data is a little bit more advanced than what some of us have worked with in our lives, because up until recently, and this is just based on quite a variety of publications that we've had in this domain, a lot of people construe data to be very specific to tabular data, so what you see in a spreadsheet. But in reality, spreadsheets are only 1% of the data that are available in the big sphere of the data on digital devices. And this is important because the next step is big data. So what is big data? So some might think it's a lot of this original data, and you might be true. However, it has to deal with the integration of information. If I can give you an example, this recording and this conversation taking place right now has to do with big data. It's a big data task. You are looking at the screen that I'm sharing from my computer. Hopefully you have a little block with my face on it. Hopefully you can hear the sound of my voice. And in the background, a lot of this information is being recorded, stored, and backed up at the same time. And all three of these data types need to work together in order for you as a user to gain the full immersion of this experience. And this is just a one-directional example. In reality, when we work with apps, especially apps that use artificial intelligence, there's a bi-directional communication that takes place. You, as the user, communicating to the app, and the app communicating to you. And the analytics or the analysis that need to support the decision-making of the artificial intelligence behind it need to work in sync with this. And so big data are extremely large data sets that can be analyzed. And I think this is important, that can be analyzed to reveal patterns, trends, associations, especially when it relates to human behavior and the interaction we have with other humans and machines in digital spaces. Now, the reason why I'm prefacing this entire presentation based on what is big data and more specifically what is data is really where we're going in terms of open science and why this is important. So what does big data allow? Well, it allows for collaboration because the big data space is inherently complex. You don't just analyze big data if you're a data scientist. You need social scientists, you need librarians, you need people who can do information management and data management. You need people who work with user interfaces, consumer scientists. You deal with people who work with social science. And so truly to unpack a problem requires an interdisciplinary team. And so what the positive side is, it allows for more collaborations between researchers and institutions, which is very important. More researchers can come on board with a particular project, so that's important. And we're solving problems faster, a lot faster than we used to before. And this is quite an important part because in the past, when you had single authored research, the rate of knowledge discovery was directly proportional to the rate of knowledge discovery of the individual working on the project. What we're seeing now is an exponential logarithmic increase in knowledge production, where strong interdisciplinary teams that comprise of strong individuals tend to make the overarching meaning much deeper and much faster. There's also a drive towards internationalization. So you might find that the expertise you're looking for might be situated all over the world. And what information and communication technologies have allowed is a stronger need for internationalization in terms of research. And as I said, faster knowledge and skill share. So this is important. And this is why open science is a valuable thing. But instead of just focusing on the utopia and the positive side, there are unfortunately negative ramifications of this. So collaboration is sometimes very vague. So who does what, where, and how? And this is kind of linked to this idea of the third point, which is intellectual property. So if you co-create, who owns what? And should there be ownership? Should it be shared freely? And if it's shared freely, how do you gain a return on investment? What's the actual value proposition? Is the value proposition inherently for society, and therefore society needs to fund this kind of research? Or is the value proposition based on capital gain, third stream income? And if that's the case, how much of a market share or profit share do different organizations have when they engage with open science? Researchers do not always contribute towards a shared vision. This is an unfortunate reality that we have seen over the years, is that not everyone has the shared vision. So if the vision is for the greater good or public good, you might find that not everyone sees it that way. Some people might see the capital gain component of it, the potential for commercialization, and not really the bigger picture. And the moment you have these conflicting visions, it tends to cause a lot of disruptions given this climate. Another important challenge is more money and cost for digital assets. So typical research projects get funded because you've got a very specific research question, and then you need certain equipment and human capital to support that particular research question. With big data, you need quite a large amount of infrastructure to be able to manage the monoliths of information that are available, as well as get the decent amount of computational power to be able to interpret that information. So it's not just about writing the best algorithm, but it's also about finding the right infrastructure which these algorithms can run on, given the size of the data. And this is sometimes a bit challenging if you're doing research and you just have your laptop computer. So some of the research projects that we work in, we deal with high performance computing and high performance computing clusters, because we cannot do the analysis or the interpretation just on our computers alone. And finally, knowledge sharing is prevalent among the willing, but it can't be forced. So there are different schools of thought where people traditionally would share information openly because the knowledge generation is part of the knowledge pool for the sake of growing the knowledge rather than benefiting an individual or a particular agenda. But this vision and this open vision of being able to share freely so that we can advance the field, so that we can generate better knowledge, isn't always shared among all the collaborators. And this is a challenging part because we don't always know where people stand with this particular thing. So I just wanted to preface what big data allows. Now, at the University of the Free State, we form part of the ICDF, which is the Interdisciplinary Center for Digital Futures. And through the ICDF, the University of the Free State really aims to create a full digital immersion through the development of expertise in both social scientific and natural sciences, technical competencies of the digital in its entirety. And it really strives to create a platform that deals with this collaborative co-creation, where we have social scientists, experts from humanities, data science, natural science, engineers, health science, to really interact with industry and interact with government in a way that can drive a digital future for the benefit of society, economic growth, and prosperity. Now, those are three different constructs. So sometimes projects do have all three of those elements in, and sometimes they do not, but it's very important that we delineate that and that we make it from the onset very clear where the intellectual property is, what the agenda is. And then finally, the ICDF really wants to take the lead in terms of this type of socially responsive, relevant digital futures. A lot of the work that is done within the ICDF and within different centers has to do with data science for social impact and data science for social good. And the more centers we have in the country and in the world that have that vision, the stronger we can drive the use case and the argument that we need to create responsive technologies and use big data responsibly for the betterment of society. just wanted to give you an example of how important open science is and how important big data are in a very specific use case. So what you're looking at on the screen is the use case of where agriculture was. So agriculture, you used to have a bunch of crops and lands, agriculture experts working in the field. Nowadays, you have the exact same traditional agriculture processes, but it's augmented with digital technologies and big data technologies. So a farmer traditionally would put on his boots and be in the field. A farmer would do the exact same thing now, but he would have a tablet, a cell phone, a smart device in his hand, monitoring and evaluating different things that are helping him make decisions or her make decisions in the field. And what this allowed was a lot of data to be collected based on agri-processes and the agriculture value chain within the field. So this is where the big data argument started in agriculture, but as time went on, it really evolved and emerged into different fields. Now I'm just giving a use case in terms of agriculture, but I need to be clear that this is applicable in healthcare, education, and a variety of other domains such as smart grid technologies, etc., where this exact same model, where a lot of data was created to be able to monitor and evaluate processes, gave rise to some of the most innovative use cases based on this big data. So once you collect all of this information, what do you do with it? And ultimately, this is where agriculture is heading. So on this slide, you can see the exact same crops that are taking place on the first farm, but all the data from that farm informed exactly how the crops grow in the most optimal conditions. And what you're looking at is an underground farm that produces the exact same as what the above ground farm used to produce, with less space and with a higher accuracy, because now the elements, the weather, the pressure, the water, the nutrient conditions, all of it is monitored and controlled based on the big data exercise. This is just one example of how a digital twin and digital twin technology can be used to optimize processes and for the betterment of society, because now you have less environmental damage in some regards, and in some regard you have more. And we're not going to talk about e-waste, but e-waste is one of the projects that we are building up in the space, because unfortunately the digital isn't all utopian. There are ramifications and side effects to the digital adoption of these things. But ultimately, open science allows data from a variety of different sources to come together so that you have a multitude of different experts working together in an interdisciplinary space to truly make this work. And so to wrap up, just wanted to point out that for data science and digital futures and open science to work, you really need what we call a data science minimum. So you need all of these skills in a team. You need people who are specialists on visualizations, team players, lifelong learning, people who have strong communication skills, machine learning skills, people who can work with data, wrangling and munging and pre-processing, coding skills, mathematical skills, and ethical skills. This is the minimum that you need in an open science space when you work with a collaborative team. So you really can only do the projects once you have a team of people together from multiple disciplines to make the work work. And so some of the problems that we sit with in data science and open science is about understanding intent of the researchers. It's about understanding the comprehension of what it is that we're trying to achieve. Between different fields, these intents and comprehensions might differ. The topological data analysis, I mean, it might fundamentally differ between fields, the interpretation of it and how that works. And also creating virtual environments for agents or artificial intelligence decision makers so that we can apply reinforcement learning in real world applications. Notoriously powerful algorithms, but very difficult to create, very difficult to implement. And ultimately, we want to integrate different social and non-social scientific disciplines in order to make this work. So what open science has allowed for is really truly this data science minimum, this incredible team that is needed, but it does come with its challenges. And as a result, big data is incredibly important in open science, but the way in which we govern, manage, and work together, that will be the secret sauce and the key to the kinds of innovations we make in the future. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Combrink. We really appreciate the information that you have shared with us. I believe because most of us, we are just a librarian, and then we don't understand what is happening behind the scene. So what you have shared with us, we have given us at least an idea of what is happening behind the scene and the work that we are doing in bringing all these different parts together, so that we as a librarian can be able to access the information and readily available as such. I think that was a very informative session, especially to me as a librarian and also to my colleagues, to understand what is happening behind the scene. Colleagues, is there any question for Mr. Kombrink? Please raise your hands, and then, okay, I saw there is a question. I will start with the way how I see them. So yes, Cornel, please unmute and then go ahead. And then I saw maybe it's also it's got a question in that order. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sungu. Arkelos, thank you so much for that presentation. I was just wondering, or I'm just curious, I know it's maybe difficult to answer, but is there a specific project, a big data project that you found very impactful, one of your own, or even one that you collaborated on?
Yes, I can answer this freely. Thank you so much for that question. So I think I have 4 big data projects that are publicly available, and this is going to sound cocky, but you can Google my name and surname, and then you will find the projects and the work that we did on there. And I don't mean this in a funny way, but there is one particular project that truly stands out, and that was the COVID-19 project that we ran in the country. So let me just give you some context. The University of Pretoria is the custodian of this data. Okay, so it's done on a public forum through GitHub, a public warehouse, and it's all the COVID-19 data that was stored in the country. Myself and a few other collaborators, underneath the leadership of Professor Bukosi Marivate. Professor Marivate is a professor in computer science at the EBIT faculty at the University of Pretoria. He started the COVID-19 repository for the country. And to date, it is the most cited, I think, and I stand under correction, but something like 68 citations within 1 year for COVID-19, because this data set was used for all the public modeling consortiums, including the books that were published by Professor Tselisi Magwala, and a variety of other people in this consortium. Within this one data set, just this one data set, there were more than 15 different funded grants as a result of this data set. There is collaborations between more than 33 universities and private research institutions to make the data in this data set possible. I know this because I'm one of the champions underneath this data set, and you can find the publications and you can find the data set available online. More than 40 apps and websites were built on the premise of this one data set. And it started with an idea to collect good quality information and get a team together. Currently, there's more than 160 people, academics, non-academics, members of the public, that contributed towards this one data set. And the data set keeps growing. And the reason why I'm giving you this use case is when we started this data set, we didn't know that it was going to turn into a big data set. We just thought it was going to be the number of cases in the country, and that was it. It has gotten to the point where every single part of the healthcare system in South Africa was mapped out. Every hospital, the amount of available beds that were gazetted in each hospital, the names, numbers of the CEOs of the hospital, should you need to get into contact with them. The geolocations of them. Apps were created pinpointing all the hospitals, the type of hospitals and the specializations of the clinics in the entire South Africa online, so that if anyone with an internet connection wants to know where the nearest healthcare facility is or are, they can go onto this website and do it. But probably the most fundamental thing that we gained from this data set was it was the first dashboard that the ministry, the president, and the ministerial advisory committee used for the first 2 months of the COVID-19 outbreak in the country. And so this data set really had a national and international impact. And that's the point I'm trying to make, is that the example that you asked for, there are many, but this is one that I can confidently say keeps growing over time and has been of immense value because of the level of collaboration, the amount of collaborators, and the types of products that came from just this one data set. I hope that answers your question in terms of a use case.
No, perfectly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cornel. Maybe you can go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zungu. Mr. Combreg, the example that you used in terms of agriculture, where we showed us the difference between what is happening now, the traditional, if I can refer to it as a traditional farming, and the future farming. One wonders whether we are solving one problem and creating another problem. You already know where I'm going to. In terms of losses of jobs, is the center busy capacitating, identifying people who can be capacitated so that you take them along to the future? Thank you.
I thank you for asking, just the same as Cornel, for both of you for asking good questions. So thank you for the previous question and thank you for the current question. So I think the future and the digital future requires a mind shift. So let me impart that mind shift onto you. Traditionally, people thought that automation replaces jobs, and that is true. Automation does replace jobs. Automation replaces repetitive jobs. Automation replaces repetitive workforces, which means that your level of unskilled work that is repetitive goes down. However, automation should not replace people. If I have a company and I require 10 people to run my company and 9 of their jobs can be automated, I have a choice. I can A, fire all 9 people and replace their job with machines, which is a terrible idea because human beings are good at innovation and creativity. Or I can keep all 9 people, replace their jobs with automation and automated technologies. And now my 10-man company can do the work of 20 men. And I say men, not gender men, I'm talking about a human. Automation increases the human capital of a company. The mind shift that we need to go into is the idea that some of the employees that will be working for a company might be fictitious and digital, meaning machines might be part of the workforce. They already are to an extent, and we can argue that, but eventually things that human beings were supposed to do is going to be done by machines and humans. What human beings are really good with is creativity. So in our digital futures, we imagine the human component remaining because we want to tap into the innovation and the creativity of people. The challenge is that the current way in which current management and companies sees it is maximize profit, minimize human capital, because human capital is quite financially intensive in a business. And so what we are trying to advocate for is taking the agriculture example. We will have less service workers on the farm, but that doesn't mean we need less monitoring and evaluation experts. What it does mean is we need to upskill our farm workers so that the level of work that they do becomes a bit more sophisticated. And we need to take everyone along for the journey. So the more digitally immersive the company, the bigger the outputs, because the staff complement increases based on virtual staff and real staff. But the task of the real staff is to become more innovative and less repetitive. I hope that answers your question. So,
yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, thank you very much, Mr. Combrink. I'm not seeing any question on the site. Okay, it was on the chat. It is a comment from Cornel. Yes, so With that being said, Mr. Combrink, I would like to thank you so much for being selfless and making time to come and share this valuable information with us. So we're looking forward to have any other engagement whenever we need you. Thank you, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I just putting it out there that it is incredibly important that we have an open book, and Cornell is such an important part of this, as well as
Yes.
all the different librarians we work with, and we have an open book. We, as time goes on, libraries actually and library information services play such an important part in terms of governance, in terms of data curation, in terms of data management, to the extent that eventually one can argue that you cannot do one without the other. And that's the type of ecosystem we need to work in building together. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I've had many conversations with librarians, especially traditional librarians, where there might be this, this perception that, you're being replaced in some way, shape, or form. That's not the case. It's quite the opposite. The field had evolved so much that it became more sophisticated. The role of the librarian now is completely different to the role of the librarian 10, 20 years ago. And I would just like to say it's an honor for me to be in your presence. So thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to an end of our session. I will ask Dr. Charlie to do the voice of thanks and closing our session. Thank you, Dr. Charlie. Over to you.
Thank you, colleagues. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much to our speakers for the day. I think for those of us who were able to attend yesterday's CHELSA LIASA inaugural Open Science Seminar, one of the speakers, what they indicated is that we are not tapping on our colleagues, especially academics, that are doing quite a lot in the open science field. And today is a testimony to that. As you might have seen that we deliberately, as an organizing committee, did not have librarians speaking on what we are doing, but we brought in mainly from the people in the field, the academics and those who are supporting research within the academic field to be the speakers, so that we show that we already have champions. We may not know them, and they might not be visible, but there are quite a lot of champions within the academic that we must link up with them, and so thank you very much. Maybe it would be proper to actually acknowledge the committee, because these are the ideas. These are the ideas that make this issue, to make this symposium to be what it is. Maybe I have to mention them by name, starting with those from Central University of Technology. Maybe it would be proper for colleagues, when I thank you, introduce you, you can switch on your camera. I know that some of you might be in the same group in one venue. It will be fine. Ms. Dora Ackerman, Emmanuel Zungu, and Kate Sele. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you for the platform. We are Zooming from CUT. You know that if it was UFS, it will be PeopleSoft. So thank you very much, CUT colleagues. And then from Sol Plaatje, Constance Shawakatipa, and Nokulunga. Okay, maybe my view, let me see, color review. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, colleagues from Solplaki. I see you are camera shy, but but thank you very much. And from the University of the Free State, Cornell Nambita, and Kaulile. Okay, and okay, I see other people are staff riding. And Nambita, thank you very much, colleagues. You might be seeing us from a different environment. We're joining you from Kwakwa, where we as part of UFS, we are launching some of the open access initiatives within the UFS. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your effort, and I think it was well done. I know that most of you didn't sleep well last night. You had some running stomachs, and in the morning at 5 o'clock, when one of our speaker appeared to be missing in action, and I was glad when they were saying she's on the air, and then with those 5 exclamation mark. Thank you very much, colleagues, for all your effort. I know that as a chair of that committee, most of the time I was not in because I was mostly involved in the arrangement of the Liasa Skexal conference, and you guys held the committee together on your own, and most of the time I would like to say thank you very much. And a special word of thanks to Dr. Knox. I didn't know that. Dr. Nokutula Mkunu, although she's traveling overseas, she made sure that she set time aside to speak to us, and we highly appreciate, and also our sincere thanks to Ms. Menya for the presentation from Solplaki, and Dr. Bankole Awuzi, Associate Professor Bankusi, and Hercules Combrink for the most informative presentations. As I've already indicated, that we are quite excited because, as you can see from the lineup, none of those speakers that we have on the lineup were librarians. It was to show that there are champions that we can speak to. And lastly, I'd like to say thank you to all of you. At one stage, you were around 90 something in attendance. Maybe we can take this opportunity and switch on our cameras, all of us, so that I can acknowledge you in person. Can we all switch on our cameras? Thank you, nice faces, nice, some familiar, some unfamiliar, beautiful people. I hope colleagues are taking photos. It will be nice to have this, to remember our first open science as the 3 institution. Thank you very much, colleagues. You were a wonderful audience, and I hope from here we will be building. I still have that vision that I mentioned yesterday, that as a country, we must not stretch ourselves thin, but we must celebrate this whole week as a country. So hopefully, Chelsea, I know that 3 directors should be here. When your colleagues at Chelsea executive bring this thing up about us collaborating at the national level, you should support this. I want us as a profession, because we tend to now fight for the speakers, we tend to fight for time, because we only have 5 days and we've got 26 institutions. So therefore, we cannot all of us be able to organize such events. Fortunately, for the central universities, we have come together as 3 universities, but other universities, as you will see on the invites, are going alone. And with those few words, I would like to say thank you very much to every one of you. I hope you have a wonderful day, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.